Joining me, an old friend from Washington, is Howard Dean, six-term governor of Vermont, former chairman of the Democratic National Committee. He presided over the DNC for the historic 2008 election of Barack Obama. He also made a run for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2004. We want to get his take on the controversy over Indiana's religious freedom law and the GOP presidential field and his early support of Hillary Clinton, expecting her to run in 2016. Howard, thanks for joining us. What do you make over, I don't have to put it any other way, but Indiana?
Indiana, Larry, is I would have thought this stuff had gone by the boards, but evidently this is the last gasp of the far right. It is what it is. It's a bigotry against gay people, and they designed the bill that way. Mike Pence is backpedaling and not getting very far, and it's going to cost them a hell of a lot of money. You can't be a bigot these days without incurring the wrath of the business community. I'll tell you what I think. One thing I think about this, though, that's a good thing. For a long time, the business community has not been a social or moral leader in this country. They've focused on making money, and that's about it. Finally, you're beginning to see on a nationwide basis major American corporations putting their foot down, and that's the best way to chase the far right out of American politics.
Are you surprised at the whole thing? Now, they say many other states have this law. Are you surprised that Jeb Bush supports it, Marco Rubio, Bobby Jindal, Rick Santorum, Ben Carson, all support this law? Does that surprise you?
I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed, especially with Jeb Bush. This is an extremist bill. 58% of the American people think that same-sex marriage is a right and ought to be allowed. All these politicians, including Jeb Bush, are out of step with Americans, and this is a potentially really bad problem for the Republicans. They need to move to the center, not to the right. And this kind of stuff pulls them to the right and makes them look unreasonable, particularly to those under 35 voters who voted 65% for Barack Obama. They are not going to vote for people who do the kinds of things that they do in Indiana.
Howard, help me. You were a governor. Understand some of the language. Does this mean, do you read this way? Because Mike Pence never seems to answer it directly. If I'm a very religious person who believes that the gay people are against my beliefs as based on the Bible, and I own a restaurant, and a gay couple comes in, they're two men and they're married, they're holding hands, they have wedding rings, can I, by this law, refuse them service?
Not only that, but if you claim that you're some person of great religion is offended by having black people or black and white couples come into your restaurant, you can refuse them service as well. Here's the difference. Here's the sophistry with what Pence and the guy from Arkansas are arguing, who's about to sign something similar. In states like Illinois, they have a Religious Freedom Act, but they also have in law that gay people are entitled to the same rights as everybody else. So you cannot discriminate if you're in a public business purporting to offer services to the public. If you offer services to some public, you got to offer services to all public. That's what this is about. And this goes, I can remember, I am old enough to remember this exact same argument being used to justify discrimination at the lunch counter against people of color.
Yeah, but the law the federal law protects blacks, right, in restaurants or anywhere else. But it doesn't specifically protect LGBT, right?
That is correct, because the Republican Congress has refused for the last 6 years to pass such a bill. And in the absence of that, then what they did in Indiana and what they're contemplating doing in Arkansas is nothing short of bigotry and discrimination. There's no two ways about it.
You think this is going to be an issue in 2016?
I think it's going to be an issue in 2016, not because it's going to be raised by the Democrats or whatever, although I'm sure some will. It's going to be an issue in 2016 because the Republicans are branded as intolerant people who don't like immigrants, they don't like gays, they don't like minorities, they try to exclude them from voting with these voter suppression bills. They don't even like women who have ideas about how to run their own lives. That is an image that the Republicans have to shed in order to win elections. And they're not doing a very good job of shedding that image right now.
Howard, what do you make of the discussions, Governor, about getting a deal with Iran?
Well, look, I think a deal with Iran would be great. I think Iran is like kind of the tough real estate agent that goes in at the closing and says, I want another $10,000 or no deal. And I think if there's a mistake the Obama administration is making is thinking that we're in the weak position. We're in the strong position here. They desperately want getting rid of the sanctions. But this is the region of the world that have the best bargainers in the world. So my own view is that we ought not to take any deal. We only ought to take a good deal. And we're going to see what's in this deal in another 24 hours if they make one. I'm worried about it. I have to say I'm worried about it.
Of all the issues international ever, and Bill Clinton told me this, does it seem to you that the Middle East is insoluble?
No, the Middle East is not insoluble, but we have to put in context what's happening. This problem really goes back almost 100 years to the end of the Ottoman Empire, when the British and the French drew lines in the sand that really meant nothing and that became supposed nations. They were never nations. They were held together by a variety of dictators and authoritarians, some of whom we supported, some of whom we opposed. When George Bush sent our troops to Iraq in 2003, they unroofed all of that. And the rules have changed. We made the Iranians much stronger. They now control the eastern part of Iraq. We allowed lawlessness to happen in the western part of Iraq, now run by ISIS. Syria, which was never really a country, is also a disaster with the dictator that runs Syria killing civilians every day with chlorine gas and barrel bombs. So there's a tremendous disequilibrium and a tremendous amount of fighting and hostility. Eventually, there will be order in the Middle East. The key for us is who maintains that order and what kind of order is it? And that is a critical solution to us. We cannot tolerate an ISIS. We cannot tolerate any regime, including Iran, that supports terrorism, because that's destabilizing for the whole world, not just for that region.
Would you say that Obama's tenure with regard to this region has been a failure?
No. I think Bush's tenure with regard to this region caused a tremendous amount of trouble, and it's incredibly difficult to get out of that trouble. But let me not just blame George Bush. This goes back to American policy in 1953. In 1953, an independent prime minister was elected named Mossadegh, who was elected in Iran, the only democratic official ever elected in an election that wasn't fixed. And the United States and Britain overthrew him and got rid of him. That was an enormous mistake. So we're reaping the results not just of bad foreign policy under George W. Bush, which was really bad foreign policy. We're reaping the results of mistakes that were made 60 years ago. And I think we've changed that policy. I think Barack Obama, through what I would call the Obama doctrine of less intervention, less meddling in other people's affairs, I think has been a good thing. But withdrawing America from the incredible damage that was caused by what happened in 2003 is a very, very difficult thing to do.
Is Obama going to be a plus or a minus or neither in the election in 2016?
I think it's really, really hard to tell. There's no way of knowing that. We'll see what happens as his term ends. You know, and even if he's a minus, it doesn't mean his presidency was a failure. Harry Truman was something 30% approval rating, and it turned out to be one of the top 4 or 5 presidents in the history of the country. So you can't really assess a presidency until sometime after it's been over.
Will this be one of the elections where international affairs will be a major issue?
I don't think so, Larry. That does happen from time to time. Usually it doesn't happen. And the reason is this is an enormous country and people almost always focus on pocketbook issues. So it's possible, but I think not likely that this will be an exception to the rule.
In a December op-ed, you said you're throwing your support behind Hillary Clinton. Why so early? She hasn't even officially announced, and you have already endorsed her. Why?
Because there's not anybody in America in either party who's more qualified to be president of the United States than Hillary Clinton. Her resume is extraordinary. She's been in the White House, major policy positions, Secretary of State. She actually is the only candidate who's talking about running that has any kind of reasonable foreign policy experience, and that's going to come in handy in this very difficult world that we were just talking about. So there just isn't anybody as qualified to be president. She's thoughtful. She's mature. I'm deeply concerned, as I said in the op-ed, about the Supreme Court. She's a high-powered, smart lawyer. I'd like some high-powered, smart lawyers who aren't ideologically tainted on the Supreme Court instead of what we've got today. So I think she's the president that we desperately need. A strong manager, somebody who understands the country, somebody who's pretty middle of the road. I think those are good things.
You do not include Joe Biden because?
Look, I like Joe Biden. He's a very decent guy, but I don't think that he is exciting. The only candidate that I've seen, I teach on 3 campuses intermittently, Hofstra University, the University of Vermont, and Yale. And the only person that's exciting any of the undergraduates in any of those places is Hillary Clinton.
But your brother, Jim,
Yes.
who now runs your old campaign organization, Democracy for America, is sending out a letter encouraging members to encourage Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts to run. What do you make of that?
So here we're going to have I forgot, what was the name of those brothers that were always feuding on the TV show? I can't remember what the name.
Okay, are you feuding with Jim?
Well, not really. You know, here's the deal. I think Elizabeth Warren is great, and she's saying some things that absolutely need to be said. The behavior of the banks has really undercut the country, not just in 2008. They're still doing the same things, pushing a lot of money around, investing in things that don't create jobs. You know, credit default swaps and collateralized mortgage obligations don't create jobs, but they do put the economy in danger. They continue to push hard for getting rid of Dodd-Frank, which is a huge mistake. So, look, I'm not against having a primary in the Democratic Party. I happen to support Hillary Clinton. There are other good Democrats. I think Martin O'Malley is wonderful. So there's plenty of good Democrats out there. Elizabeth Warren is a great one. She's going to be a leader in the party in some way. And I don't, so while Jim and I have slightly different takes on this, I think we both want the same for the Democratic Party and for the country.
A recent National Journal article was headlined, "Will Martin O'Malley be the Howard Dean of 2016? Mm-hmm. The suggestion is he could be a progressive standard bearer in the primaries. What do you make of, I gather you know him pretty well, what do you make of Governor O'Malley?
I like him a lot. And the thing I like, there's a lot of things I like about him, but the thing I like about him the most is that he measures what he does. It's so much in government is all theory and ideology and, you know, BS, and that never mind the facts, let's just do what we think is the right thing. Martin, when he was mayor of Baltimore and also when he was governor, used to come into his cabinet meetings with a series of metrics. And did you meet this metric with this program? If not, why not? And maybe we ought not to have this program, or maybe we ought to do it differently. He was never bound by ideology. He was bound by the facts. And, you know, as a physician, I'm incredibly attracted to people who are bound by the facts and incredibly turned off by people who address ideology without caring what the facts are.
The feuding brothers were the Ewings on Dallas.
Oh, that's right.
That's right. We came up with it. All right. The field of Republican presidential candidates looks very large. It will be pretty large. They're going to limit the debates, I think, to 1 a month to try not to get too much conflict within the party. Is Jeb Bush look like the leader to you?
Well, he did until this Indiana stuff came up. You know, he originally started out saying something like, you know, and the only way to win the general is to be willing to lose the primary. And I thought that was great because somebody's got to stuff it to the far right that's governing the Republican Party right now. That's not where the American people are. As I said, I've been very disappointed that he's not willing to stand up for the rights of gay and lesbian Americans. And I think that's where the country is going. And if he gets caught in the same kind of whirlwind that Mitt Romney got caught in, where he had to end up declaring he was a severe conservative, he's not going to win. That's all there is to it. And I actually think he also could lose the Republican nomination to a more conservative candidate.
Like the governor of Wisconsin?
Like the governor of Wisconsin, who in my opinion would be about the most disastrous president we could possibly have outside of Ted Cruz, who's not going to get the nomination.
So you think well, Jeb Bush, of course, could do as others have done, go right, and then when the campaign begins, back off on those issues and become central.
That's true. I think that's right. And I think that may be his strategy because he is getting pushed very, very hard from the right. But at the end of the day, there's really no place in America for the kind of presidency that Mike Pence might envision, given what he's been doing in the last few weeks.
Well, knowing Jeb as we both do, he probably disagrees with the Indiana law. Why do you think he came out favoring it?
Because I think he came out favoring it, Larry, because I think he's worried about his primary. He's worried about Iowa, where the voters in the Republican caucus are very conservative. There's a lot of talk about finding a right-winger to oppose him and to beat him and why why people are sick of having the Republicans nominate relatively moderate people. I think having the Republicans nominate a relatively moderate person, it makes it harder for us to win, but it's much better for the country because then you get a reasonable, thoughtful person as president. I may disagree with him. I'm not going to vote for Jeb Bush. I'm going to vote for Hillary Clinton, but I would like to see a choice between two people that I can respect. And that is what I'm hoping for. And so I'm sure Jeb's philosophy probably is to try to move to the right enough so that he can win the primary and then move back to the middle. But that's not so easy to do, as Mitt Romney showed in 2012.
Do you have a thought on who Hillary would select as a vice presidential candidate?
Absolutely not, and I'll tell you why. One of the multiple faults that I had in my own campaign is we spent a lot of time thinking about who should be our vice president before the first vote was cast in Iowa. It turned out what I thought about who should be vice president didn't make any difference at all. So my advice would be nobody should even think about that until somebody has the nomination.
Governor, thanks as always. Great talking with you.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be on with you, Larry.
Always good seeing him. Former Governor Dr. Howard Dean.